I want to talk to you about you as a filmmaker, but also, you've been working as an editor who cuts trailers and reels and things like that, and I'm really interested in that. I know we've talked about it before, but I want to get into it a little deeper, get some more tips and tricks from you. But before we do that, I like to ask every guest I have, when you were a kid, did you have a favorite movie?
I loved fantasy movies, like
Yeah. Okay.
Never-Ending Story, Labyrinth,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then when I got a little bit older, I just became obsessed with Star Wars, as most kids do.
Right.
The
Right.
original trilogy. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, it was really just all about like take me into that other world, that
Yeah.
cool world. So
Okay, well then let me rephrase the question this
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Of all the films that you watched as a kid, what was the one you watched the most, do you think?
Mm. That's a great question. I mean, I think it really might have been Labyrinth, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because it was like we didn't have a TV when I was young. And so like when I'd go over to my grandparents' house, like they just had the VHS and they just pop it in and
Right. Yeah.
of course when you're a kid you don't mind watching the same thing over and over again. Um,
Right, right, right.
but yeah, I think that was it for me.
So do you know all the words to The Baby with the Power? Just
I
curious.
wish. I
Just
really wish
curious.
I did. I think I'd be
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
cooler if I did.
Or have you ever dressed up as David Bowie in that character for Halloween?
I have, as a
Prob-
matter of fact.
You really have?
I have, yeah. Actually,
That's funny.
I won a costume contest as him a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. See, now I see you in a whole different light. Now I know this about you, Micah.
Yeah.
So, hey, listen. So obviously you love movies as a kid, and at some point you decide that you want to work in the film industry full time as a career. When does that come for you? When do you decide that's what you want to do?
Um, let's see. I was interested in filmmaking, and a friend of mine was making a movie, and I helped him produce it and act in it. And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome!" I mean, I always loved movies. I worked my first job was at a movie theater. I did like extra work in movies, background acting stuff, and then when this came along, I was like, "Cool, let's make a movie." And then at the end of it, I was just totally hooked, and kind of just looking for any way, in the door, um, because I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, and I didn't feel like just diving into film school without like knowing, having a plan was the best thing. So I was just sort of, okay, where do I go? And then this job opened up at a trailer company as a production assistant,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, okay, great. Let me, let's try it out. And then I started to see editing as a means to kind of learn directing and filmmaking. It was kind of reverse engineering, how to direct something. If I figured if I knew how to edit, then I could learn how to direct, and bypass film school. So
I see
yeah,
that.
so
Yeah.
that's sort of where I started.
I think as you talked about reverse engineering, I definitely think that when we're in post production, editing a movie or cutting the trailer or whatever it is, that's a big part of shaping the story. It's another chance, if you will, to tell the story. To manipulate it and decide what to share and what not to share. So I think it's interesting that you coming in that way, starting out as a PA at a trailer company, is in a lot of ways very useful to you as a filmmaker, as a director, I'm sure. And I want to get to that, but I would like to talk a little bit since you've been cutting trailers for a long time, because I remember you cut a trailer for me a long time ago when you were first starting for Outlaw Trail. I mean, I've known you a long time. I've known you a very long time. So
Yeah.
I know you've been cutting trailers a long time. How many trailers do you think you cut? Just a random guess.
Oh, that's
Hundreds? I know it's hundreds.
that's a tough one. Yeah, probably in the hundreds. But it's interesting that you bring up Outlaw Trail because that was actually the first trailer that I cut and finished. I had sort of been like playing around with other movies that that we had, in the trailer house, but like
Yeah.
that was the first like finished thing that I did. So that's kind of a cool for full circle thing. Uh,
That is very cool. That's
yeah,
very cool.
yeah,
Well, you did a great job on that trailer, and I'm sure that over the years you've gotten even better at it. So you probably look back at that trailer and go, "Oh my gosh, I'm such a rookie. Look what I did there. Why didn't I do this?" I'm sure. I'm sure. Just
absolutely.
just just like me as a film director, I go back and I watch my first films, and I'm like, was I doing crack? What was I doing? Why was I doing this?
Yep.
So, but you have to make the project and you have to move on and not really worry about it and just, move on to the next thing that's in front of you.
Yeah.
So when you started at this trailer house as a PA, what kind of responsibilities did they originally give you at first?
Yeah, so as a PA, it was, at that time, we were delivering tapes of trailers to studios,
Mhm.
on VHS and like, other ones. So it was running around delivering tapes, helping out with music searches, helping out in the tape room, like whatever they needed around the office. It was just kind of, go do this thing.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're not busy, make yourself scarce. So yeah, and then I just kind of uh in my spare time, just started playing around with the editing software at work, because at that time it wasn't something you could really have at home. So it was
Yeah.
like I just kind of dip into the edit bays after I got off work and play around with some stuff. And then pretty soon producers were, handing me, scripts for TV spots to cut. And they were still teaching me at that time, but that was it was a great company that helped people learn and sort of, promote from within. So
Yeah. That's
um
very cool. And what software were you using at that time? Like you mentioned, it was not affordable to kind of edit at home. I mean, Premiere was around and Final Cut was around, but it was very limiting, for at home setup.
yeah,
But what were you guys editing on at the time?
totally. Yeah, we were on Avid, and at the time Avid was like a software and hardware combination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Final Cut had just come out, but it wasn't really kind of being used that much in the industry. So, everything was really, yeah, on Avid at that point still.
Are you still working on Avid now, or have you
I worked on
transferred into
both,
something
actually,
else? Yeah.
Premiere and Avid, yeah.
Great, great. And now, of course, you can edit from home if you want. You've got probably a great setup at home, or even
Exactly.
just your laptop. You can just do it anywhere, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. You can edit anywhere, which is amazing. Um,
So as you start kind of playing around at the trailer house, with practicing and everything like that, when do they kind of feel like, okay, hey, we've instructed and taught you enough that we think that you have the skill set to like take on a project for a client? Like, how long did it take from the time you started to that happened?
yeah. I mean, let's see. I would say by the time it took a little over a year from when I got promoted to assistant editor, to editor. So
Yeah.
so like, and in those assistant days, like you're doing things for the editors, but then you're also kind of like cutting things on your own. And they start you off small, like with TV spots, 30-second or 15-second TV spots, and then eventually, I got to the point where, hey, we're going to send this over to the client. And that was so exciting, to like
Mm-hmm.
get something out the door in front of the studio. It was so cool.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and then, and then eventually they handed me trailers. And I think you sort of work your way into that, like, hey, here's this trailer, can you make some changes to it, and kind of like build up to just creating something from scratch, because that's a pretty big step.
Yeah. You just did a trailer that you posted, well, you shared it with everybody on Instagram, which was very cool. It was kind of like a thriller, you know. It was kind of really, really cool. I loved it, and that's what made me remind myself that I needed to get you on the podcast sooner than later because I wanted to talk about it. But like, for example, for that trailer you just did, what was that trailer for?
That was a movie called Who Invited Them.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it was a kind of a thriller horror comedy.
Yeah.
For Shudder. And yeah, it was a fun process to work on that because it's just like it's a great combination of of genres.
What do they when they, so for example with the one that you just did for Shudder, Who Invited Them, what they give you obviously a full version of the movie, so you can see all of it obviously. Do they give you suggestions of what pieces they want to use, or do you have to watch the whole movie and kind of figure out the pieces you're going to use and then drop those on the timeline? Like what is the process there when you're first starting?
Yeah, so it's a very collaborative process, making a trailer. With that one in particular, yeah, I mean, usually you'll watch the movie, then you'll have like a conversation with the studio about direction, and some of that direction might come from the filmmakers, some of it might come from the studio, and then your producer at the company will, you'll all kind of work together to kind of come up with a strategy for this trailer. And also the filmmakers, like in the case of this movie, they had a bunch of other trailers as reference points that they shared with me. So that was really cool. That's always really helpful to kind of get in someone else's mind.
And after you kind of get a sense of the tone they're going for, the pacing, you've seen the samples, you've been given maybe some needle drop music and all that, do you try to like start with the music and then lay picture to that, or do you kind of just lay in picture and then try to find music that supports it? Like, is the chicken and egg thing here? Like, what comes first in that scenario most of the time?
Yeah, most of the time, it's finding the story. Finding the story with dialogue and visuals, because that's the primary element, in most trailers. So because if you start with music, sometimes you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. You're focusing on this thing that you may end up replacing anyway. It's like, oh, let me get that cut on the beat, and then, but like you still haven't even figured out the story yet, so it makes the most sense most of the time to just really get a good story structure in place with just dialogue. And doesn't have to be perfect, but if you get something most of the way there, and then you can start kind of laying in the music to get an idea of what this is going to feel like, if it's going to have the energy you want. There are times where if you're cutting a trailer that's more about tone, you might start with the music. Some trailers are really just kind of like, they call them a tone poem, where it's just more about getting a sense of what the tone is of the movie. And also with TV spots too, oftentimes you can start with just music, because it's a little more, so if you're working with 30 seconds, it's a little more kind of like, I guess you can kind of visualize all the beats in your mind. Like, okay, I'm going to start with like a quick dialogue bite, and then bam, the music's going to come in, and then it's going to build, and then it's going to drop out, and then I'm going to have a sound up at the end, and then we're going to come back big for the title. There's a 3-act structure to trailers.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
So you kind of get in your head, you start to be like, okay, right around here, I need to be this needs to turn into the second act. Like, I need to get to this story point. You know, but or you know, this is where I want to. This is the back end. This is where I want to build. This is, but like really every movie, you know, presents its own set of challenges and its own opportunities to do something that feels fresh and original, and hopefully isn't a template of anything that's come before it. But that being said, you know, there's only so much you can do. But I think the memorable movies, the memorable trailers are ones that feel a little bit different in some way, you know. And so I try not to go in with any kind of predetermined cookie cutter sort of idea of what it's going to be. But certainly when you watch the movie, you know, you're like, oh, okay, that's a great trailer moment. That has to go in, you know. Yeah. But I try to let the movie kind of speak to me in a way, you know, and not try to force it into anything.
Let's talk about some of the key things that make a good trailer. When you see a trailer, like, what's paramount? Story, right? Telling a story.
Yeah. Story. I mean, I think there's a few key elements, and that is like, what's the story? You know, what's the spectacle? What are the stars, and what's the style?
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the things that you're going to remember, and those are the things that are going to grab you.
Yeah. What dictates the style? Is that the pacing? Is that the music? When you say style, what are you referring to?
Yeah, I think the style is the combination of pacing, music, and sound design.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge element right there.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that you just mentioned when you mentioned sound design is, and I see this both in trailers and also in reels, is the use of sound effects throughout to emphasize a moment or whatever can really elevate, if you will, the material. A hit here, or I'm assuming that when you do this, you're like, you know, right here I need a swoosh. I just think that would just add emphasis to this moment. Do you do a lot of that in it when you're cutting something?
Yeah, absolutely. Trailer editors do most of the sound design that you hear in a trailer.
Yeah.
Some will get added in the mix. Sometimes when they do a sound mix, sometimes they'll add a little sweetening here and there. But most of it is the trailer editors. And yeah, you kind of get a sense for it as you gain experience of like what it needs, you know, what it needs to accentuate things and fill out moments and, you know, make something impactful, and, you know, or funny, or it's a tool for storytelling as much as it is for creating style, you know.
I think also, you know, when we go and see a movie, you know, especially afterwards, we like, oh, hey, let's go get some coffee. Let's talk about the movie, or driving home or whatever. You know, when you're kind of reflecting back on the movie you just saw, you mostly talk about moments that were very memorable, that popped, that 10 years from now, if you ever say, oh, have you ever seen this movie? You're like, oh my gosh, that scene where he was fighting with the shark or whatever, or when he turned and did this, or she did this, whatever. Are you trying to create moments in a trailer or a reel like that makes it memorable? Is that one of the key components? Like, I got to have at least 2 moments in my trailer that they're going to walk away and remember that they want to see this movie because they saw 2 things at least that got them excited. Like is there an approach to that? Is that on the list of priorities? Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the first part of that process is just watching the film and seeing how it makes you feel, and what are the memorable moments that stand out for you. Um, but yeah, so that's definitely a very important part, is just finding those key moments that like that that make this movie stand out from everything else. Like, oh man, they did something really really different here, and putting that in the trailer, because if you can look back at some of the of the trailers through the best movies, and it'll have all of the key scenes, all of the most memorable scenes, will be in those trailers. So yeah, it's a really important part of crafting a trailer, and deciding what to put in it, is what are those scenes people are going to remember.
One of the things I see a lot in trailers is where there'll be music and then they'll stop the music for a funny line or a moment, and then the music will kick back in, and sometimes it's not even the same music. Sometimes it's different music. It's like I don't know if I want to call it a turning point, but like for example, in the trailer that you just did, there's a moment, if I remember correctly, where the person I believe who lives in the house sees that the unexpected guest has got, I'm going to say crack because I don't know what she has. I don't remember. And you think she's going to kick her out of the house. And instead, and I think the music stops, she says, "Do you have more?" And then you see them like doing the drugs. And it's like, that feels like you created a moment there by actually not having music there, if I remember. Like you stopped everything for the moment. Is that a quite frequently used tool in trailers and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. A music stop. You can't you can't cut a trailer without it.
Okay.
It makes
It's
jokes
essential.
funnier.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes jokes funnier. It really creates emphasis on dialogue lines. It creates kind of punctuation in a way.
Yeah.
And allows you to shift gears potentially into a new music cue.
Yeah.
Which is important, because to do that smoothly, and so the audience doesn't notice, is the most important thing.
Yeah. I think other things that I had noticed and I wanted to ask you about is, obviously we talked about the importance of picking good music, obviously that supports the tone of it and the pacing of how you want it to feel, but also like the cleverness of, like, say, match cuts, like like having somebody with a phone, they go to slam it down and then it's like somebody cutting like a big piece of meat on a table. It's like that match cut or a matching turn, or that's I see that quite a lot in trailers too, and sometimes in good acting reels where people are looking for clever ways to make transitions between shots.
I think match cuts have gotten more popular in trailers recently. The one that stands out to me actually was the first time I kind of remember seeing it somewhat recently, was the Hereditary trailer.
Oh, sure.
They did some cool match cuts in that. And I don't know if that's what started the trend, but they're very good. It's a very cool visual trick, but it also is kind of dependent on the filmmaker, creating that for us. But we're always, in advertising and trailer advertising, we're always looking for things that can make it feel fresh, and different, and grab you.
What are some other things that help hook people? A big explosion, a famous face. What are some of the other things that are very common we see in trailers?
Yeah, definitely. Stars are going to hook you. Getting to, like, if you're going to have an intro, some kind of intro, like getting to the next bit within 10 seconds is really important.
Yeah.
Because that's when you start to lose people and you want to, like, know what this movie's about.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, and this isn't something new, but oftentimes there's something loud right at the beginning of the trailer to get your attention, to kind of like perk you up. So there might be a hit, or there might be, some soundbite that like grabs you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially TV spots too. You'll see that too. Right at the beginning, like they want you to get your attention. Get you to look up from your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think sound design can be a big part of it. Potentially a song,
Mm.
like a cover, or a rendition of a song in a way that you've never heard it
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
grab you. Oh, cool, that's awesome. That's
Yeah. Talking about
you
that
know.
point, actually, I remember there was a really great cover that actually was more liked than the original. It was Mad World for the Danny Darko, if that's the name
Mm-hmm.
of the film, Danny Darko, and it was a really great rendition of it. But you immediately knew what the song was, and you're like, "Ooh, I like this version of the song." And I think that might have helped a little bit to keep people hooked to want to see more of the trailer to some degree.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That was an awesome cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and a very cool trailer from what I remember. I can't remember if that song must have been in the movie, right?
Yeah, it's in the movie, and I feel like it's also in the trailer. I feel like they featured it pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a huge that was a big song at the time. I think it was a very cool cover.
yeah.
And yeah, so that's definitely, and speaking of trends, that's a very popular trend
Mm-hmm.
too, is sort of like taking specifically taking maybe like energetic song
Mm-hmm.
and creating a cover that's like very kind of like slow and understated,
Mm-hmm.
kind of creates a mood. And um I've definitely seen that in the past several years.
I want to transition a little bit. I want to ask you, how has working on trailers helped you as a director? Because you're also a successful director. You've directed some films. You're obviously continuing to write and direct more films and music videos and other things, of course. But how has this skill set that you've developed over 20 years shaped you as a director and helped you? Like, what tools do you bring from there and bring to your projects?
Well, I love a good montage.
Okay.
But I think overall, well, for one, learning to cut, learning to edit was a way to study filmmaking, as I mentioned. But yeah, it brought that awareness into directing, of like what I'm gonna need later for
Right.
coverage.
Right.
You know?
Right. Oh, yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, and and I think also having an idea of how picture and music interplay, and sound design, and how to create those moments um, with sound, is a big deal, because you're kind of, you know every time you're editing a trailer, you're creating these little mini scenes and scoring them, and you're probably trying 5 different cues before you land on the one that you want, or maybe more sometimes. But and you see how music really affects the tone. And so I think being able to I think it helped being aware of tone, um, what music does, and yeah, like I said, storytelling through editing,
Yeah.
were the big key things for me.
So what's great about what you're saying is that you have very good pre-visualization skills. You can be in a scene, especially with limited time on a low-budget movie or on a TV show where you just, you're shooting a high page count, or you just can't be in a location for too long. You can quickly see, like, I don't need this scene from 5 angles and 5, long takes. I need I'm going to start the scene on a close-up of this. Then I'm never going to come to this angle again. I'm immediately going to go to the wide here, so I don't need the full thing in a wide. I just need a piece of it. Like, you almost can just go in and shoot just the pieces, if
Yeah,
you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's huge when it comes to visualizing storytelling, like you said.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, I assume other directors build that skill through other ways, but yeah, for me, it's like you said, being on set and, okay, I need this piece, I don't need that piece, or like, or how do we make our day, we have to cut something,
Yeah.
can we get from A to B,
Yeah.
A to C?
I don't know if a lot of directors, I think a lot of directors probably have that skill set, but I don't know if there's a lot of other ways for them to learn it except for having their own personal experience of editing, even if it's just their own reels and things like that, or just really being involved with an edit. Because I have worked with directors where I've just produced and I watch them kind of block out in the tech scout kind of what they're thinking the scene's going to play out, and just watching them like standing and like, well, I kind of like it from here, and then we could maybe do it from here too, and then from here too. And it's like, you really just want to put 12 cameras on this and then just watch what the editor does and say, I love it. You don't actually want to like take 2 minutes to think about what's the most important key moment in this scene and where do I want the audience to be at this moment and this moment and this moment. But rather, you just want to make sure you covered it, so when you get to the editing, you know it's going to make sense, right? And so I find
Exactly.
I find that directors who have editing experience are the ones that have the best pre-visualization skills.
Yeah,
That's just
yeah.
so
I
that
think I think
yeah.
I think even one of the challenges for me is just like toning down my visualization,
Mm,
because like you sort of have to you have to shoot it and get all of the pieces, and then go into the edit with an open mind of
mm-hmm.
what you're gonna cut to,
Yeah.
and not just sort of like stick to the movie you made in your head before you shot it.
Yeah,
You know.
that's an excellent point. You're right, because if you're too specific, there's nothing to shape. You can't elevate it or change it. You're kind of stuck with that. So you want to build a little bit of a safety net, of allowing there to be a little bit of excess, to work with, to
Hmm.
shape with.
Hmm.
It's also, I think, good for the actors where you don't just like, I just need you to say this one line. That's all I want you to say. It's like, yeah, well, I need to like ramp into it. Like I need to kind of get in the flow for that line to come out nicely. Could you like maybe give me like the 30 seconds before to kind of get into it? So
Yeah, yeah.
I think when we
You
first,
have
yeah,
to.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you have to kind of build in safety nets for yourself.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, um, like you said, just take the whole scene. Just take the whole scene in that close up, and then you have it, and it's like it's 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 like bringing home material to, like, I'm gonna make a quilt now, and I'm gonna use all of this material that I
yeah,
created, and
yeah,
weave this tapestry together, and I'm gonna need some excess, but I'm gonna leave some stuff on the floor, but I just need a lot to get started.
yeah. I think it's also good, if you can, if time permits, to get, even if you're not going to use the whole thing, and if you're just going to start in a wide and then go into tights, it is nice sometimes to have at least one take of a full master, specifically for the editor who's not on set with you. Even though they can read the page, it's nice for them to kind of have this bird's eye perspective on the scene and see it played out like everybody else got to see it on set, and say, okay, I have a sense of the scene now. Even though we're not going to use 80% of this, it gave the actors an opportunity to kind of find their marks and their beats and all that. And now I'm going to throw 80% of this away, but at least I know what it was intended to look like as if it were a play. And that's always seems to be very helpful to an editor. It's always a little frustrating to editors, good editors specifically, when you just give them little pieces and they're like, I can figure it out, but it would have been nice to see it all in one rehearsal of sorts. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
All of those little things, every everything can cut down on your options
Mm-hmm.
in the edit. You want the most options you can have in the editing room,
Yeah.
and if you don't have the character walking in, if you don't have this piece or that piece, it just cuts down on your options of what you can do,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you get stuck
Yeah.
and with a certain edit, certain coverage, and you can make it work. But it's best for the movie or whatever it is if you can have those options.
For sure. Yeah. So now that you've been obviously directing now too, what are some things that you're excited about doing? Are you hoping to do a feature soon? And if so, what genre do you like to work in?
Yeah, so I've written a feature. I'm working on writing a second feature. Actually working on a documentary right now. And I just finished post-production on a pilot.
Oh, congratulations.
So yeah, thanks. But yeah, I think like I love drama. I love thrillers. I love fantasy. So that's sort of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, yeah. That's your lane as a director.
That's my lane.
I'm trying
to stay in my lane. Exactly.
Because that's what they want to do, especially when you're sort of kind of getting your first few features under your belt. They want to put you in a lane. If you're doing a bunch of sci-fi and then all of a sudden you throw them a loop and you give them a Christmas movie, they just explode. They're like, I don't understand what's happening. How is it possible that you can do sci-fi and a Christmas movie? I don't understand how you have both sets of skills. It's like, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. It's like, you know what? A director, if they know how to talk to an actor and tell a good story, it shouldn't matter what the genre, but they just want to put you in a box,
Exactly.
They just want to put you in a box. So you got to stay in your lane.
Exactly.
You got to stay in your lane until you get super famous, and then you can be like Spielberg and you can just do whatever you want, right? So
yeah, or Peter Jackson. Oh, I'm gonna do documentaries now.
Yeah, just do whatever you want. Do a documentary about the Beatles. Go do some Lord of the Rings. Do a Frighteners. Scary horror. Which, by the way, that's also a good trailer. By the way, if you've ever seen the trailer for Frighteners, one of his early movies, it's primo. It's really good. Let me ask you this question as we're sort of wrapping up here. But as a filmmaker, what resource or tool can you not live without that you always use, that you always go to? Got anything like that?
Great question. Well, for writing, a book that was really helpful when I was writing my first feature is called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby.
Okay, you love that.
And yeah, I found that super helpful. I would say, I didn't go to film school, so I am always looking for these little things here and there. But I've done a couple of workshops with Sundance CoLab, which is really awesome. They have a lot of great instructors, and it's not it's accessible too, for filmmakers who are still learning. And I think the website No Film School is fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great film.
They've got a lot of they've got a lot of just kind of like tips and kind of learning resources for people who are figuring things out themselves. So yeah, I think those are my main things.
Those are all really great. I'll have to check out the book. I don't know the book, but if you recommend it, I'm gonna go get it and give it a read. I think that's good. So
yeah.
And when you're talking about the Sundance thing, are these like online courses you can take? Is that the idea of that? Is that what that is?
Yeah. These are Zoom courses.
Okay. Oh, so you're not just not watching something that's been pre-recorded. You're actually interacting with someone.
Yeah, most of them you're in a class, with maybe 30 other people. They do have some self-paced things that are pre-recorded, but a lot of them are with instructors, and you get, and you can get some one-on-one feedback on your project, and it's pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool.
So definitely.
Yeah, it's kind of like taking a UCLA extension class for filmmaking, or if you're a cinematographer extension, you can take ASC has a bunch of classes where you can either attend in person or watch kind of in a Zoom setting. So it's really great when you can get that feedback, because as much as books are really cool, the actual experience of being on set is just so much more of a benefit to you than just reading something in a book, you know? So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, sometimes, I mean, for some people, like that structured learning is a great kind of start. Like I did some of those UCLA extension classes, and that was sort of my first introduction to directing. And I really only did like three classes, but it was enough to kind of get me out there shooting, you know, and trying things, and just getting creative. And that was that sort of set me off with the momentum I needed to keep going.
that's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Micah, it's been great to talk to you. I'm excited and thankful for your time, and just excited that we finally we were able to finally record an episode of the podcast together.
I know. Me too.
I'm excited to see your next film endeavor, the next trailers you cut, and all the other things you're up to. If people want to follow you on social media, see what you're up to, watch some of the cool stuff you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, MICAH Stewart, and you can go to my website, micahstewart.com.
Easy peasy.
Easy.
All right.
Yeah.
Micah, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.